discuss an enormously important issue. And let me begin by thanking the 11 United States senators who have signed a letter to the President urging him to use the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, if necessary, in order to prevent a default on our national debt. And those signers are Tina Smith, Elizabeth Warren, Jeff Merkley, Ed Markey, Mazie Hirono, Peter Welch, Dick Blumenthal, Jack Reed, Sheldon Whitehouse, and John Fetterman. Throughout the history of our country, the United States government has done what it is supposed to do. Not too surprisingly, we pay our debts. That's what we have always done. In fact, over the past 63 years, the national debt limit has been raised nearly 80 times, 49 times when a Republican has been president and 29 times when a Democrat has been president. The debt ceiling was raised 18 times under President Ronald Reagan, 7 times under President George W. Bush, and 3 times under President Donald Trump, when the national debt increased by some $8 trillion with no strings attached. Bottom line, we pay our debt. That is what a major country does, the largest economy in the world. We pay our debts. And let's be clear, what the debt ceiling is about is paying money that has already been appropriated and spent. It has nothing to do with future budgets and future spending. You could debate that. This is simply a question of paying off what has already been spent. However, in an unprecedented and outrageous way, extreme right-wing Republicans have hijacked the debt ceiling process and have said to the American people, if we don't get our way and impose savage cuts on the needs of working families, the elderly, the children, the sick, and the poor, if you don't do what we demand that you do, we are prepared to allow the United States government to default and bring our economy and the world's economy into turmoil. That's what the Republicans are essentially saying. If the right-wing Republicans force a default, it will mean the loss of millions of American jobs, interest rates on mortgages and credit cards will soar, and Americans will lose trillions of dollars in household wealth. As disastrous as it would be to default on our debt, it would be equally disastrous to pass the outrageous Republican proposals. Under their proposals, it has been estimated that up to 21 million Americans would lose Medicaid, ripping away the health care they need to stay alive. Over 1 million women, infants, and children would not receive the nutrition they need to stay healthy through the WIC program. Nutrition services, such as Meals on Wheels, would be cut for more than 1 million low-income senior citizens in this country. Over 640,000 families would lose access to rental assistance, and more than 400,000 low-income families would be evicted from Section 8 housing. 200,000 children would be thrown off of Head Start, and 180,000 kids would lose access to child care. 80,000 jobs would be cut at the VA alone, impacting the quality of care we provide to the men and women who put their lives on the line to defend us. All of this is absolutely unacceptable. Meanwhile, while imposing draconian cuts on some of the most desperate people in this country, the Republicans are refusing to ask the wealthiest people in America, the people who have never, ever had it so good, to pay 1 nickel more in taxes to start paying their fair share of taxes. Further, they are refusing to cut defense spending at a time when we already spend more on defense than the next 10 nations combined. And they have made it clear that they are prepared to hold our entire economy hostage unless the president gives in to all of their demands. And this is something we cannot accept. In my view, and the view of all of us up here, the president has the authority and the responsibility under the Constitution to make sure that we continue to pay our bills. In fact, the 14th Amendment of the Constitution clearly states, quote, it's not ambiguous, the validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned, end quote. Is this a perfect solution? Is imposing the 14th Amendment a perfect solution? No, it is not. But using the 14th Amendment would allow the United States to continue to pay its bills on time and without delay, prevent an economic catastrophe, and prevent devastating cuts to some of the most vulnerable people in this country. It should be exercised if necessary. Ed Markey is from Massachusetts. Ed?
Thank you, Bernie. Thanks to all of my colleagues. We are here to send a message to President Biden to do what it takes to stop Republicans from driving our economy off a cliff. We know that President Biden can cut deals. We know that he's a man of his word. And I have confidence and faith in the president in these negotiations. But I do not have faith in Speaker McCarthy and right-wing Republican House members. Speaker McCarthy wants to jeopardize the whole of the American economy, sacrifice working and middle-class families' hard-earned savings by the trillions and hundreds of thousands of jobs, and put funding for rental assistance, early childhood education, nutrition assistance for moms and kids, and our entire social safety net on the line for some cheap political stunt. Republicans are not serious about finding a solution. So we are urging President Biden to utilize his authority under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which clearly states, quote, the validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. Using this authority would allow the President and the United States to continue to pay its bills on time and without delay, as the United States Constitution requires. It will ensure we prevent a potential global economic catastrophe. Speaker McCarthy says he wants to limit, save, and grow. But what he and his right-wing Republican House members really want to do is cut, gut, and slow. Cut taxes even more for the wealthy and corporations. Gut programs like Medicaid, Head Start, Meals on Wheels, Pell Grants, community health centers, and slow the pace of clean energy and climate action by rolling back the tax breaks for wind and solar and electric vehicles, all to protect their big oil buddies. So let me be clear. We will not default on our debts, and we will not default on our commitments to environmental justice, communities who fought relentlessly to secure the historic climate and clean energy investments in the historic Inflation Reduction Act. The reality is that the debt limit isn't about government spending. That's a separate federal budget and appropriations process. Republicans know this, but don't want the American people to know that. What we're talking about with the debt ceiling is whether we are going to default on the bills we've already incurred. It's like racking up a bunch of spending on your credit card and then refusing to pay the bill at the end of the month. This is Republican hypocrisy on stilts. Over the past 6 decades, Congress has raised the debt limit 49 times under a Republican president and 29 times under a Democratic president. The debt ceiling was raised 3 times under President Donald Trump, when the national debt increased by some $8 trillion, mostly because of tax cuts for the wealthy that he and his Republicans passed on a party line vote. The president should exercise his authority under the 14th Amendment to protect our economy and the full faith and credit of our country. So thank you, Bernie. Thanks to my colleagues. And now let me turn to Jeff Merkley from Oregon.
Thank you very much, Bernie and Ed and team. Let's pull back the curtain on the Republican strategy to make the rich richer and the powerful more powerful. They say this is about controlling the deficit, but let's look at the history. We had 100% support in the Senate for the Deficit Control Act, the Budget Control and Impoundment Act of 1974. 22 years it was there with support for controlling deficits, and Republicans used the nuclear option to blow that up and say instead they could use it to, in that filibuster-free pathway, to increase deficits through massive tax cuts for the rich and powerful. The Republicans blew it up. The Republicans proceeded not just to blow up that process, but pass those tax cuts under Bush and under Trump, and those are the major causes of the national deficit. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq added to that with Republican support. So here we are with their strategy to say, first we run up the deficit, and then we use the deficit to say we need to cut programs for ordinary Americans. Not to have fair taxation for the rich and powerful, no, to cut the programs for ordinary Americans that my colleagues have outlined so well. So this is a hostage taking, and it is unacceptable to have the president in a position where Kevin McCarthy says you either savage programs for ordinary Americans and flood the country with fossil fuels, or I'm going to run the economy off the cliff. And when it runs off the cliff, that could be 8 million jobs, a drop of the stock market, an increase in interest rates. The president has a mechanism to push back. He has the 14th Amendment. Bill Clinton said he would use the 14th Amendment. Constitutional scholars have said that this is there as a powerful tool for the president. It is unacceptable to have a situation in which the American people are threatened in this process. And not only that, but this strategy will be used by Republicans time and time and time again to attack programs for ordinary families and ask at the same time for even more tax cuts for the rich and powerful. So, Mr. President, we have your back. We know that this pathway has not been traveled before, and every president hesitates to go down a new pathway that has to be worked out. We have your back. We stand with you against this type of unacceptable hostage taking. Thank you.
John Fetterman, Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Thank you, Senators. I'm here for one simple reason. We're here for one simple reason. President Biden needs to consider using the 14th Amendment if necessary. The entire GOP debt ceiling negotiation is a sad charade. And that's exactly what's wrong in Washington. We're playing with the livelihoods of millions just so the GOP can just turn the screws against hungry Americans. This is the whole reason why the 14th Amendment exists. We need to be prepared to be using it. Again, remember, say that again. We must be prepared in order to use it. And we cannot let reckless Republicans hold the economy as a hostage. And an unelected Supreme Court justice will try to blow up our economy. That's on them if they have to judge on that. So, thank you.
Thank you, John. Peter Welch. Thank you, John. The great state of Vermont.
Thank you. America's in real peril now. This threat to default on our debt is real. That's never been the case. We came close in 2011. There's been some grandstanding on both sides about the debt ceiling in the past, but the president and the majority party always accepted the responsibility to guarantee that we paid our debts in full and on time. And the reason for that is the consequences of default are catastrophic. Bernie, you've outlined what they are. And ironically, the advocates of default claim what they're doing is trying to bring down our debt, and Moody's estimates that a default would increase our debt by as much as $850 billion. So the tactic they've chosen will aggravate the problem they claim to be concerned about. The reason I'm so concerned is that this proposal that did not go through a single committee, had no regular order consideration, does such radical transformation to the budget that we have, the folks over there are serious. And Speaker McCarthy had to make one concession after another 15 times in order to get elected. And we've seen everyone reading the tea leaves. Are things looking good or are they looking bad? We don't know. Here's what we do know. Once pen hits paper and there's something real that folks are going to react to, the Freedom Caucus folks will be livid and explode. In my view, Speaker McCarthy has limited capacity to really negotiate. He's handcuffed and in leg irons from that 15 votes that it took to get him elected. And if he is able to negotiate something, once he tries to present it, there'll be uproar. So this question that's going to come down to may be the president having to make a second choice decision. His preference is what we should do is what we've always done, raise the debt ceiling. But what it will then come down to is using the authority of the 14th Amendment, which says something, by the way, that all of us know doesn't need to be in law to be real, and that is the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law shall not be questioned. The entire GOP is repudiating that language in the 14th Amendment. And by the way, the choice that the president has to make is whether, if it comes to it, he invokes the 14th Amendment or allows Republicans, in effect, to repudiate existing law. The appropriations that they want to unravel have all been passed by previous Congresses. It's the law. So we all support the president's ability, if he decides it comes to that, to invoke the 14th Amendment to save this country from economic ruin. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions? Yeah, Burgess.
Do you think that President Biden should stop talking to Speaker McCarthy?
I think none of us are aware of exactly what is happening. I think what the president has insisted from day one, that there be a clean debt ceiling approach, and I think we all support that. I think it's just premature to respond to information that we just don't have. Yeah.
Senator, you guys keep saying if necessary. Have you all ruled out voting for this package if it includes
What package is that?
well, the debt ceiling package that they're trying to
And
put
you,
together?
do you have the details of that package?
If only I did.
All right, so we don't, to be honest, we don't, again, I don't think we're here to speculate. We don't know what that package will look like.
So this is sort of a fail-safe that you guys are.
I think what we're saying is the president has the authority to use the 14th Amendment, and he should be prepared to do that, period. Yeah.
President Biden himself has cast some doubt on the ability to move a 14th Amendment issue through the legal system in time to solve this crisis. So is this a viable solution for this specific debt limit crisis?
I think it's the best solution we have. It's not perfect. But throwing children, throwing millions of people off of health care and creating a situation where children in this country go hungry, that's less perfect. Yeah.
Senator, do you hope to get more senators to sign on to this petition?
I hope so. I mean, we've got 11 in the last one day, and I think that's pretty good. Yeah.
Senator Sanders, is part of the reason you all are here today is because there are still negotiations between the president and the speaker that include things like potentially work requirements for some federal programs?
Well, I've answered a lot. Does anybody else want to jump in on that?
Are you concerned about his ability to negotiate
Anyone else?
on that issue?
So we don't know the details of what he's negotiating. What we do know, there's a difference between a hostage taking and a negotiation. We know the president has put on the table many improvements in tax fairness that McCarthy has rejected outright. We don't know the rest of the details. But we're saying to the president, if the bottom line is that the only deal to be had that McCarthy will sign on to is one in which ordinary families are savaged and in which the economy is flooded with fossil fuels, that is unacceptable.
And I should just add to what Jeff just said. Let's take a deep breath and appreciate where we are right now. We are living in an economy where working families are struggling, where 500,000 people are sleeping out on the streets, where kids are going hungry, while the people on top have never, ever had it so good. And the Republicans will not accept any proposal that asks the wealthiest people who have avoided taxes year after year, who have an effective tax rate lower than working class people. They're not willing to accept any increase in taxes for their billionaire friends. Clearly not acceptable. All right, maybe one more question? Or, yes. Yeah. Okay. You know, it's a private conversation. Okay, thank you all very much.